The Quit India movement of 1942 to 1943 was the last of the three great nationwide anti-colonial nationalist struggles. These were known as satyagrahas, truth, graha, to hold on to. So these are these nonviolent resistance campaigns. So the first one was 1920 to 1922. This was the Swadeshi movement, where people were making their own clothes. 1930 to 1932 was the Civil Disobedience Campaign. This was marked by the Dundee Salt March, for example, and then this one. Now, while the non-cooperation movement of 1920 to 1922, it was pretty urban-based, city-based. Civil Disobedience Campaign 3032, well, that's more widespread. It involves more peasants. And these rural peasants, they're radicalized by the Great Depression. Now, Quit India in 42, 43 is the most radical of all of them. And it is really supported by the poor and working class. The poor and working class were hit hard by the Great Depression in the 30s, and then they were really hit hard by wartime inflation, food shortages, Churchill's policies in India that really hurt rural Indians. So British wartime policies that helped the war effort hurt Indian poor, both in the cities and in the countryside. So the Quit India movement is this mass action. It's leaderless. Now, why is it leaderless? It's leaderless because Gandhi, so I should back up. Gandhi said, literally, this is do or die. That either we drive out the British or we die trying. He makes these radical calls amongst other Indians like Nehru, and the British swoop in, arrest many of the key leaders from the Congress Party. Gandhi is arrested. 1,000 or more political leaders are arrested. Gandhi's in jail for about 2 years, up to the summer of 44. So he's in jail for 2 years after this. Just as a note, as an aside, if you added up all of his jail time from both his South Africa days protesting apartheid, or what becomes apartheid, and protesting against British rule, he's in jail for about 11 years total of his life. So getting back to this, Nehru's gone, Gandhi's gone, all the big leaders are gone, and the British really see this as, from their perspective, it's the greatest threat since the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857. They are freaked out. It's not a city thing, it's a countryside thing, it's nationwide, and they're really worried. There are kind of two phases to Quit India. The first phase is this mass movement in 1942, and then there's actually this larger sort of almost guerrilla warfare that takes place in an insurgency that takes place later on. So we have violent clashes between mill workers and police. We have really, I guess, the key thing for you guys to take note of, this is really student-led. These are students putting out pamphlets. Women students are really playing a key role in its organization, female students. I'd like to actually just read to you a pamphlet, a handbill, that's distributed by students to students. And it's distributed in Bombay in August of 42. Let me just read to you this in full because it's kind of powerful. This is our final struggle for freedom. Let us put up that resistance which will dislocate the entire machinery of the government. The students elsewhere in India have done the same thing. The student community of Bombay shall not lag behind. Therefore, students, the backbone of India's aspirations, should fight and fight until India is free. No power on earth is going to give freedom to India. We shall have to snatch it from our imperialist foe. Down with imperialism. Wow, that's powerful, powerful stuff. I mentioned that there's this sort of quasi-guerrilla insurgency. What that involves is attacks on rail lines, attacks on roads, bridges, and in the case of one city, the city of Patna, they completely cut off access except by air. 3/4 of the police stations in central and northern Bihar are attacked. So it's an attack on infrastructure that benefits the British, and it's an attack on police stations. But yeah, pretty radical stuff. And when we think about Indian independence movement, we're thinking of, marches and Gandhi and so forth. But there's a lot more to it than that, and Quit India shows us this. What we should also make connections to is, when does this come about? It comes about in the 40s. As you know, there was radical movements decades earlier. So it's not the case that this mass action, this quasi-guerrilla stuff is late because of only desperation. There is this type of action earlier on. So I show you these photos because they're just so striking. What we have here at left, we have this man here with a watch, bald man here. This is Nehru, Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India. Here he is in jail. He's stuck in jail for 2 years during the Second World War. I mean, in a few years, he's going to be the head of state of India, and he's in jail. So that's striking. All the Congress leaders are in jail. Congress offices are closed until 44-45, and party organization is shattered. What this leads is to a vacuum where other leaders can step in. Communist leadership benefits from the lack of competition. They're not really involved in Quit India, but their leadership, their membership goes from 4,000 in 1942 to about 100,000 by the end of the war. So with Congress knocked down, other political parties get more membership. What we see here, this is Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Jinnah really benefits from Congress being locked up. Jinnah and the Muslim League don't participate in Quit India, and so they don't go to jail. And what ends up happening is the British build up the Muslim League. They invite Jinnah, and Jinnah alone, to London for some meetings. And what ends up happening is this kind of reversal from 1937. In 1937, you remember from an earlier lecture, the Muslim League doesn't win the majority of seats in Muslim-majority areas in this map here. So even in Muslim-majority areas, Muslim League isn't winning the majority of any province. But what ends up happening is Muslims in South Asia look around and they say, that Jinnah guy is getting invited to London. That Jinnah guy is talking to the Prime Minister. Well, if we want our needs heard by those in power, we need to go through Jinnah. And so Jinnah becomes this sort of champion of Muslims because of his access to the crown. The photographs here at right are by Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. Bose, B-O-S-E, is here, here, and here, shaking hands with Hitler, meeting with Tojo and Heinrich Himmler. His philosophy basically, he was a Gandhian for decades, but it was just too slow in his perspective. And hey, we did the Swadeshi movement, we did the non-cooperation movement, and these British dudes aren't leaving. Let's take it up a notch. Let's stop marching. Let's start doing, in his view. So he goes to Germany. He meets with them. Um, Hitler really doesn't take him very seriously. He gets on the submarine and goes to Japan. He actually does, in fact, build a pretty significant army.